Hi dear Daoland friends, I am Yoli O. I want you to watch this video all the way to the end, especially if you're interested in Chinese medicine, whether it's in the TCM form or in the Daoist medicine form or in any other form that you or your teachers have made up. Thank you very much. We are now with a completely different weather than we were last week, and this video we're also going to talk about something related but not the same. We are going to talk about TCM, and we're going to talk about some criticism I had about the videos that I make about TCM, about Chinese medicine, that I seem to be very negative about TCM. So I'm going to talk with you about my opinion about TCM, what is good about it, what is bad about it, why I think people should be open-minded. The suggestion that many people have about my videos is that I'm very much anti-TCM, and there are things that I think, well, maybe, but there's also many arguments why I think, no, not really. But there are some points that I think we as practitioners of Chinese medicine, as Western practitioners, but also as modern Chinese practitioners, have to be aware of, namely that 90% of what is happening in Chinese medicine is not visible to Westerners. So there is a lot that we don't know, and every time when we dig up something from the past, we find out more things about Chinese medicine, how it would benefit modern society, but which is excluded because of its theoretical framework for modern TCM. When you are running a school for TCM, then at that moment you have to become aware of the fact that you are either having a business or you are teaching, and we are going to talk about these kind of arguments. We're going to try to see and figure out what would be the best way to deal with Chinese medicine, what are the risks for TCM and the development of Chinese medicine in the future. To start with, let me phrase it very clearly. I have no beef with TCM for what it is as it is. There's a lot of people being helped by TCM, and you have to also understand that Chinese medicine at this moment is the widest practiced form of medicine in the world. So it is not something that you can think away by saying like, oh, we have to go back to the roots or something like this. This is not what I'm saying. What I am doing in my videos, I am trying to emphasize the fact that Chinese medicine has different kind of aspects that are not addressed within modern TCM, and these parts of medicine that I think that are important are specifically the Chineseness of Chinese medicine. TCM has a few problems, and it is not the fact that it is not effective, and it is not that people don't achieve great results with it. This is not the problem. The problem is, though, that people misunderstood TCM from the beginning and have absorbed TCM as being Chinese. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about in this video is the non-Chineseness of TCM, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Chinese medicine as a whole, which puts this into the proper perspective. Yes, let's go to that. In the running course of the last few years, I've been in contact with several people, acquaintances, colleagues, and so on. And I can tell you stories from conferences where I was speaking, where it was clear that people were not always happy with the message that I have about Chinese medicine. I happen to take that very personal, because I think as a Chinese medicine practitioner, you should be open to the opinions of people who do not agree with you. Why? Because diagnosis is mostly listening to other people to try to figure out what is wrong with them and how we can help them, right? So this is basically it. So in your study also is the diagnosis of a particular kind of knowledge system, and what people tell you about that knowledge system is not going to be enough to really understand it. This is just the foundation of any kind of science in any kind of culture. Of course, once you become stuck into a particular kind of set of opinions, then at that moment you will feel offended about a particular kind of thing. And sure, you might disagree with anything that I say. I am very happy about it. But at the same time, I think it is important to listen to what I say. So what happens to me sometimes is that people come to me And it just happened to me last week also. A respected colleague that I personally I follow him also on Facebook and other places, and I think he's doing great work and he's really very dedicated to his profession. But he's doing TCM. I have students who are TCM practitioners, and they sometimes have this like doubt, like I can hear what he's saying, but it goes against my indoctrination with TCM. I use the word indoctrination in a cynical fashion. It's not exactly what is happening in their mind. It's just that they feel like, you know, what they have learned is correct. It's sufficient for them, right? That is okay. That is okay. And at the same time, it is not enough. The thing is that I get approached many times by people. They say like, this is not what TCM says. We learned something different. And you have to understand that who are your sources about TCM? What are your sources about TCM? If you look at the amount of material produced in Chinese medicine over the last, say, 2,500 years, that is an amazing amount of material. From this, less than 1% has been translated, so has been made available to Westerners, and most of that is done through the lens of modernism, because since the 1970s, the translation of Chinese medicine materials, Daoist materials, and so on, went through a speeding up process through which more and more becomes available, but through this particular kind of modernist lens, which I also am very often protesting against. And I will tell you all a bit more about that in a moment. So I see myself very often not so much trying to defend what I'm doing, but actually basically reflecting back on that to myself and saying like, okay, then should I change my message? I have just agreed with some people, okay, I will try to pay more attention to excusing myself for my opinion, not in the sense of saying like I'm sorry or something, because that's not what I mean, but by making clear that I'm not against TCM in that sense. And the reason why I'm going to explain in this video, so that afterwards I can always point back to this video and say this is the reason why. This is also very helpful for my students, because they will face the same problem when they talk to other people. First of all, let me make clear that in almost all cultures we have to express ourselves to medical staff and also to many clients in a westernized medical platform. Yeah, so that is now unavoidable. It is rules and regulations for most countries. When people do exams, a lot of their knowledge is including Western medicine, science, and so on and so on. And it in itself is just the authority of modern biological science. Modern medical science is by all means very undemocratic, and it is not really very tolerant of other ways of thinking. That doesn't mean that it is wrong, right? It just means that this is their method, this is their thing. They try to explain everything, and it's a little bit of micromanagement of reality. And that means that other opinions than their own are not really welcome, for the simple reason that other opinions, they make you insecure about yourself, and they make you aware of the fact that you do not understand everything. You cannot understand everything. That is why people make rules against other things. They are canceling things. And canceling things is happening in many countries all over the world. I was just reading an article this morning about what has been cancelled in the United States lately, and that the royal family of America doesn't do anything about poetry, doesn't do anything about art, doesn't do anything about music really, and they don't have pets, and you don't never see them in a happy setting, and so on and so on. So there was a whole list of things that this modern royal family of the United States isn't including, and it's actually excluding. And every time when somebody doesn't agree with the king, he is automatically banning them from his own inner circle, so that he doesn't get confronted with the disagreement. This is not the only king in the world. There is in Russia, there is a king like that. There is in China to a lesser degree. There's a king like that, but in Turkey, in Hungary, in several African countries and other Asian countries, there are kings which are called presidents, of course. But in reality they behave like kings, and they try to micromanagement the understandings of other people, what they are allowed to say, what not to allow. This is a principle that we saw already in 1984 from George Orwell, where they create a sort of newspeak. So all of a sudden the Gulf of Mexico is called the Gulf of America, even though Mexico is there also, and Mexico was there earlier than the United States. So they have most naming rights. Cities, villages, institutes all over the world are continuously being renamed by whoever is in power at that moment, because they want to shine as being the savior of the country. That's okay. When we are practicing Chinese medicine, we also try to be a savior of a lot of people. So inherently, we can understand where that comes from. We feel proud about our work sometimes. And when people talk to us, we can also be very dismissive and say like, yeah, this is just nonsense. And we have to try to avoid it, of course. We have to try to be modest. And that means also continuously reinvestigating what we think we know. So from that perspective, we can see that in this modern culture, there are a lot of trends available that are also happening in Chinese medicine. So when we look back to the history of Chinese medicine, you have to understand that the Chinese government calls TCM Western medicine with Chinese characteristics. So this actually is already everything you need to know about TCM, right? The fact that Western medicine is like the current culture globally, world culture globally, the Chinese government itself has admitted to itself and to the public in broad sense that Chinese medicine is Western medicine with Chinese characteristics. It doesn't mean that they don't investigate Chinese medicine from its historical perspective, but it means that TCM is part of what is called New China. New China compares itself with the United States, a young nation. So at the same time, for propaganda purposes, they say Chinese medicine has a long history, which is true, of course. Technically, it's true because it originates a long time back in history to Neolithic times and probably before that time already. But over time, it went through many stages and changes, and since the involvement with Western medicine, it has been making a 90-degree break with its past. And since its involvement with Western spirituality, it made another break with its past. And as a result of that, you can clearly say that TCM is not Chinese medicine. It is New Chinese medicine. As a result of that, it is not exactly why we wanted to go study Chinese medicine, because we were attracted by the exoticness, by the strangeness, and by the alienness of Chinese medicine. The Chinese characteristics make it alien enough to be acceptable for many people, and that is okay. I have to say it again, it is okay. This is not meant as cynicism. This is not also to say to my friends who made this kind of criticism, like you're wrong and I'm right. It's just that everybody has his own choices, and that is understandable. But I think that many people are attracted by Chinese medicine because of the Chineseness. And it is difficult sometimes to see what is not Chinese about it and what is Western about it, because many people also, when they start out, they don't know that much about Western medicine too. They don't understand Western science that much. And modern Chinese medicine schools, they are usually more like a business, and they try to educate people to get them to work as quickly as possible. They are usually adult students who have an interest, and maybe they want to care about people, maybe they're just curious. And there's thousands of reasons why people would study Chinese medicine. And it's not just in Europe, that's in Africa, that's in South America, that is in Asia, all kinds of places. There are people studying Chinese medicine. And what they study mostly is TCM. Don't forget, you need to still like this video, and you need to become a member if you're not a member yet. And if you really are interested in what we're doing, come follow our classes. Look in the subheadings and try to see what is there, what you can learn from. Link up with us, and hopefully you also become part of our research program. as a stakeholder. Before TCM became popular in the West, because of the opening of China and the massive export of the soft power of China by means of the development of attention for Chinese cultural things through the Confucius Institute and through other kind of organizations, and also the attractiveness of a lot of the exotic things where we for hundreds of years have only tasted from. People were mostly invested in medical acupuncture, and it was something that was done by doctors because of their curiosity, but not because of their understanding or the knowledge of it. Anthropologists, sociologists, and several other sciences, they have been busy with studying Chinese medicine for a long time. They have been busy with studying the cultural backgrounds of these practices and sciences, how they affected the Chinese population, and how it could actually influence also the West or Africa, or how Chinese medicine could help because of its relative affordability compared to Western medicine. Medicine in the West, of course, is way too expensive, and medicine in China is way more cheap. And as a result of that, we knew there should be done something about it. But everything was being seen through this lens of Western medicine, anatomy, physiology, because we had no comprehension of what they meant in the past. At the same time, in the West, there was this movement coming up from the 1960s, 70s actually, where it gained traction, and in the 1980s it became more normalized. In the 90s it was like standardized, and namely a particular kind of language where we were talking not so much about the influence of God, but we were talking about the influence of energy, which actually is just a replacement of the word of God in the way how it's being used in Western esoterics. But at the same time, we can see that in that process, everything from other cultures was seen as a proof of the fact that the word energy was a correct word, because there are a lot of words which are abstractions in our conception of the other culture, unknowns, like the Force in Star Trek, and like the Force as is being explained in Indonesian mysticism, and prana in yoga, and so on and so on. These kind of things, they are relatively unknowns, and as a result that a concept like energy was very attractive, because it seems to link all these concepts together. The concept of mana, the concept of rauch, the concept of... well, you can mention quite a lot of names, maybe better than me in a short time. So at the moment when that was part of our language, also at the same time Chinese medicine became more available, and there was no real explanation for what is qi and how does qi relate. In Tai Chi Chuan, they talked about Jing, Qi, and Shun, but in TCM, they mentioned it, but they didn't really explain anything. They didn't really explain qi in that sense. So it was quickly and easy to translate into energy without being necessarily correct and not verified as a concept. And when you look into the textual context of things, yes, in many cases you could replace the word qi for energy sometimes, but in many cases it is not really the appropriate translation, and as a result of that you actually falsify the meaning. Okay, so that is one thing. Then where does that come from, this idea of Western medicine with Chinese characteristics? I've been talking about it in China. I've been talking with colleagues in China about that what they call Chinese medicine is not necessarily Chinese because Chinese practice it, because the roots of that knowledge comes from Hegelianism, comes from Western biology, comes from Western science, physics, and so on and so forth. And as a result of that, I decided for myself, for my school, that if I teach Chinese medicine, I do not do TCM. It's not that I don't like TCM per se, because I study TCM too. And when people go into the master program of us, of the Daoland program, at that moment, then in the bachelor they learn Yangshen, which is the foundation of Chinese health theory. And at the moment when they go to the master program, they go to the actual clinical practice, and then we discuss different kind of schools which are coexisting in China and which are not TCM per se, let's say it like that. Some of them are pretty modern, some are old. Some go back far, some of them less so. But my primary concern is Daoist medicine, because the history of Chinese medicine is Daoist medicine, not TCM. Chinese medicine as such didn't exist because Chinese medicine, for a large part of Chinese history, was seen as something of these Daoists. It's a religious practice, and it has nothing to do with literacy. So people were not seen as civilized, literate people when they were Daoists. Very often they said like, oh, if you failed for the exams, the state exams to become an official, you can always become a Daoist because you don't have any real requirements for that. The idea of Chinese medicine was already transformed in the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty, they were Manchus, they were from a Mongolian origin somewhat, and they did not agree with the Chinese culture as a whole. They conquered China in a relatively short time, and they wanted to change China also to create permanence of their rule. Of course, China was way bigger than the Manchu area, land of origin, and as a result of that, they had to change the way of thinking of the Chinese to make them think like Manchus. And for this, they wanted to get rid of Chinese medicine as it was, and they wanted to reform it. They wanted to change Confucianism as it was and wanted to reform it. They wanted to change the foundational theory of Chinese sciences like yin yang, wu xing, tripartition, and so on, and they wanted to reform this so that it become more in line with the Manchu culture. This is also why in China the Manchu culture was never fully accepted, because they felt like, well, this is alien repression. This is understandable. This happens with every culture that is being taken over by another culture. It takes at least 3 to 5 generations before they have changed. This is what people are afraid of when they see foreigners coming into their country. They like the tax that they pay and they like the work that they do, but they don't like the people. So that is one of the reasons probably why in 50 years' time, almost all workers will be replaced by robots. And if we go mechanize real people, then at that moment for Chinese medicine, a lot of things will be finished also, because in Chinese medicine, we follow organic patterns, natural Chinese medicine anyway. So at the moment, when we look at it from that perspective, we can see that in the Qing dynasty, they started changing things, and the nationalists and the communists, they just gained traction and they went faster and faster in that change. And this did lead to the idea of Western medicine with the Chinese characteristics for TCM. Research shows that about 70% of all Chinese medicine is Western medicine. Right? So this is something that every Chinese medicine practitioner has to understand, has to know. When you go to a Chinese medicine university in China, you go for about 6 years to university, similar like in a Western medicine university. And you learn, well, this 70% of Western medicine, and they have shown in different researchers in China, and I think Western researchers also have noticed that if you are graduated at Chinese medicine universities and you go work in a Western medicine hospital in China, nobody will notice the difference, because you have learned to deal with all the same machines, diagnosis, and so forth and so forth, and you have this 30% of specific Chinese knowledge, Chinese medicine knowledge. In the past, if you were going to study Chinese medicine, there were no universities, right? So you went into personal study with a master, and that could take up to 15 years before they actually would let you practice by yourself. Nowadays, there are people who are practicing Chinese medicine. They have bought a diploma because of their wealthy families and so on, and they go to the West. They get some bonus to buy their stuff with them, to settle themselves as a clinic. And they have never really understood anything about Chinese medicine, but they practice anyway because, it is attractive to go to a Chinese person because they study Chinese medicine. As if in China there is no corruption. There is, just like in the West, just like in Africa, just like in any other place of the world. It's just that in some places, some professions, corruption is a little bit larger. And I have seen people go crazy and nuts that people in their classes had rich parents and they could go through school without any study and still get to their diploma. What happened in Chinese medicine in general is that, like I said before, Chinese medicine was practiced by Daoist monks or priests. It was part of their study because in their aim to become an immortal, they had to understand the human body. So in the learning process of Chinese medicine, they had to exercise themselves to understand how the model worked. And also they had to understand how then that model that they recognized in themselves and corrected, how that knowledge and understanding could be used to also heal other people. So this is where is a big difference between TCM and Chinese medicine, because this Daoist influence of Chinese medicine meant that you had to use yourself as the main model, the cultivation of yourself as the main model for learning Chinese medicine. There is no separation between Neidan, Weidan, herbal medicine, and acupuncture and massage. Acupuncture and massage also are a unit because acupuncture is basically massage with needles. Like people nowadays use tools, wheels, hammers, and so forth and so forth. Needles were an invention of the masseur, not the other way around. Of course, being acupuncturist helps you to understand also massage a bit better, but primarily acupuncture is a form of massage, even though you penetrate deeper into the body. The idea of energy medicine is that you can operate inside somebody's body separate from tools, so that only your mind can do that. I'm not going to discuss that here. I'm going to do another video about that because I think it is worth the trouble. I've done a few videos on the history of Qigong, and I'm going to do more about that, and I will try to explain Qigong from the perspective also of energy medicine. Also not something that I'm against necessarily. It's just, well, let's leave that for the other video, otherwise I'm going to deviate. At the moment, when you look at that perspective of the Daoist medicine practice, then you see that there is a particular kind of requirement to make you qualified to become a practitioner. And that means why in the Huangdi Neijing, in the first chapter, it actually says that it is a moral crime to teach somebody who is not willing to do the work to become a proper practitioner. So TCM, of course, is a bookish medicine, just like Western medicine is a bookish medicine. That means you learn it from books, and the last thing that people found in the science is the most valid part. While in Taoist medicine, it is not the actuality of the knowledge which is the most important, but it is the ability to use that what is already there. So there's a saying in the West, when you row a boat, you have to row with the tools that you have at hand. So if you have 2 oars, you row with 2 oars. I don't know if it actually happens to be there in English, but it is a literal transliteration from a Dutch saying. When you are looking at it from that perspective, you see that something happened in Chinese culture during the Song Dynasty. In the Song Dynasty, which by many people is seen as the Song Dynasty is by many people seen as the time when the Chinese medicine became complete and found its holist roots. I don't really agree with that, especially after having involved myself in the translation of the Huangdi Weijing, the complementary part of the Huangdi Neijing, which I did a video about. You can look it up. And then the Song Dynasty, basically what they said is like, okay, we need a subclass of literati for the people who do not graduate, and we will do that by recognizing herbal medicine studies from as a literal profession. They didn't accept every kind of medicine, but they started accepting herbal medicine as a formulatic art. And you have to understand that Chinese medicine in relationship to health always was food medicine. It was never herbal medicine. But at that time, the literati could make up all kinds of formulas to go deeper into the skill of medicine. And they did something very specific, which I think was Paul Onschuld who wrote about it in History of Chinese Medicine. But maybe it's another book of him, or maybe it was another writer. But I thought it was Paul Onschuld. And what they did is they said, like, okay, this is what we know from herbal medicine. These were the short formulas from the Tang Dynasty. In the Tang Dynasty, they said, like, if you have too many herbs or too many needles in one formula, then at that moment, the effectiveness becomes unclear. It was common knowledge that if you do acupuncture, and you puncture more than 3 channels, then the loss of blood in these channels could cause somebody to faint or to die. So this is why that was not really common to practice. At the same time, in the Song dynasty, when they came to the recognition of a particular aspect of Chinese medicine, namely the formulatic medicine, they decided that they have to also prove to the emperor that they were better than the Tang dynasty. So they doubled and multiplied the amount of herbs in a medicine concoction without necessarily changing the nature of the medicine, because why would you fix something that isn't broken? Yeah, and the herbal medicine formulas they were using mostly in food products, not so much as a separate herbal medicine. They made it into what is nowadays called herbal soups. And these herbal soups, they had so many herbal things boiled in there that the taste became terrible and the smell equally an acquired taste. But what happened is that the extra herbs that they put in there, they had to be neutralized also at the same time. So the additional herbs that you put in there, they were constructions that had to reduce each other's effect, and especially the side effects, because as you probably know if you have studied Chinese medicine says about herbal medicine that every herb that you take, every food that you put into your mouth, every word that you put into your mouth, and every vision of things that you look at can become a poison. And especially when you overdose yourself on a foodstuff or on a herb or something like this, you will overdose yourself on it. And as a result of that, it is not effective as a medicine, but it actually makes you sick. So all these different kind of combinations, sometimes 10, 20 herbs, they were mixed together and they had to neutralize each other to make sure that the original formula was still at work and the other things were not. And this model is used for TCM herbal medicine because, well, of business, really. Then the herbs were also changed in their properties because it was not important to fit in with the Chinese medicine theory per se, but it had to especially fit in the name giving and the description of chemicals within Western biological science and chemistry, biochemistry, so that the body could become affected and that it could be recognized as medicine and in the way how also Western medicine is being recognized. And as a result of that, as I noticed in meetings, it was more important to have this title being medicine and being fully accepted as a science than actually to be Chinese medicine. And it is also something that you have to note for yourself, like this is the actual history of Chinese medicine. It doesn't mean that the new formulas or the renewal of the formulas were not effective, because they're amazing. Sometimes people do miraculous things with it, and I personally think herbal medicine is a lot of work because trying to understand it from the Chinese medicine perspective, the learning process in the past was way more complex than nowadays, because now you open a book, you read what are the properties, you read what is the working for this disease or that disease as being determined by that, because you don't really have to understand yin yang wu xing and so on and so on. You just have to follow the principles and the rules, and you take the formula and you can adapt the formula as how you think. So there is still a particular kind of creative aspect to it, but you're not creating your own formulas as a result of that. You are basically a technician, and that is the same with acupuncture. You follow an acupuncture formula, so you're a technician. In the past, only a few needles were used, but Japan invented filigree needles, and as a result of that you could use more needles because the danger for bleeding is much less. Also, because of the filigree needles, the concept of blood loss became less important. It was less damaging for the body, and as a result of that, as a practitioner, you hardly ever see blood, right? So you're not aware of the fact that there's blood in many of the channels. And at the moment when you look at this and somebody tells you, yeah, that's because qi is energy and blah, 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 and circulates around. That was a theoretical model from the Song dynasty. But if you look at the content of the channels and how they are different from each other, then you can understand that circulation in the way how it's being described as an energy circulating through the body isn't possible. And as a result of that, you see that there's an innovation there. There's a change away from the history and tradition of Chinese medicine. Nonetheless, there's many less practitioners of the old style Chinese medicine, so it's much harder to prove the validity of that kind of medicine over Western medicine. That is also one of the reasons why I think we should study that if we can. And I have accommodated my school in such a way that you can go through the different kind of changes without losing what you know from TCM, but actually adding to it on the basis of what was there in the past. There's also why in the school we pay a lot of attention to anthropology, history, sociology, and so on and so forth. We use history and social change and anthropological research and so on all as a foundation to understand Chinese medicine as it is, because Chinese medicine is not also, that is also what is a very important part, not focused on the treatment of diseases. Treatment of diseases was seen in the Huangdi Jing as the lowest level of practice. The highest level of practice of Chinese medicine is to help people to become an immortal. And it means that you have to learn to manage health. And so many more people are, well, sub-healthy and have the opportunity to become super healthy and therefore immortal, while only a fraction of the people are actually sick. The actual treatment of people with diseases was seen as folk medicine, even in China. Okay, of course, I'm very happy there's a lot of people treating all kind of diseases on a symptomatic basis, whether it's with Chinese medicine or Western medicine. I owe my life also to a large degree on that, and I have owned my life currently to the practice that I learned with Daoist medicine. So there's a big difference, because Chinese medicine, TCM, and Western medicine deals with what is and corrects what is wrong, or tries to correct what is wrong, while Daoist medicine tries to achieve what is possible. So I hope I explained that sufficiently, that you're really enjoying this. If you feel like studying at my school, the Daoland program, or at a future incarnation that we are now building at this moment together with our new German partner, and then at that moment you're welcome to step into that program too. But you have to understand that I will have to ask you a lot of questions about your understanding and your skills to see what you need to learn. So you don't need to learn everything, but I think the bachelor program for most people, 90%, 80% will be new stuff. So I think that will be valuable for you. Anyway, even if you practice Chinese medicine in the TCM way or in a medical acupuncture way, it doesn't really matter. Thank you very much for paying attention all the way to the end. And this is great.